In 2012, our surveys are showing in autumn that we're having a high number of locusts in between Jerramunga through to Ravensthorpe. Now, please be aware that each of those squares represents a property and a single sample or survey point that's on that property. So it's not to say that that entire area has got 400 nymphs per square metre. It's just to say, look, that we found them at that particular property. What we do know is that there's very high numbers present. Those nymphs are now adults. They are moving. And we are interested in knowing if anyone's sighted swarm movement and also any laying of eggs. This will enable us to predict what's happening around spring. Some agronomists have been asking what are the implications for autumn. It really does depend on what the seasonal conditions are like. If we have a warm start, we may potentially see what's happened in Geraldton in previous years, where the locusts may persist in those areas. If it's a cool start to the season, look, it's unlikely that we're going to see any early season damage. However, we do need to be aware about what's happening in spring. It's going to be the August and September spring rainfall and temperatures which will be critical for the survival of any overwintering eggs. And it's really going to depend on what crop stage that the crops are at when the nymphs hatch as to whether or not there's any crop damage that occurs. Pretty much it's crops that are drying off that are high risk, and it's really going to depend on where the locusts are present within a crop as to whether or not control measures are put in place. Last year, you need to bear in mind that we had locusts hatching in the middle of paddocks, in areas where we had never anticipated having locusts hatch before, because it's nowhere where I would have thought that there was enough clay material or compacted earth, but that's got to do with the fact that it was a long-term minimum tillage paddock. There was compaction in the middle of the paddock, and there obviously in those sandy soils there was enough clay content for the females to lay eggs. So this is just a heads up. Also look in the middle of paddocks for any hatchings and do a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not it's feasible to spray in those paddocks, and look at what the cost is for aerial spraying versus ground rig spraying, and that goes for what's in pastures. Our thresholds are all present on the website, and further information is present under L for locust on the Department of Ag website. Any findings or research will be up there, so if you want to find out the latest, that's probably the best place to look. Now, last year, most of you should be aware, the health pesticide regulations from 1956 were updated. Now, what does that mean for you? Basically, it means that agricultural users, and this is aimed only at agricultural users, have a bit more flexibility to control pests. If a chemical is registered for use in crop, you can use it against any pest, up to the maximum amount it's registered for. You can't exceed the maximum amount that it's registered for on the label. It also means that if on a label it says that a chemical is only registered for use in another state, we can use it at those rates in WA. It also means if there is a permit in place in another state against a particular pest, we can use that chemical, even if it's not registered on crop, as long as it's used on the crop that the permit says, against and only against the pest that's on that permit. Now, last year we had a number of groups applying for permits for emamectin. It really is a good idea that if you have a pest that you need an emergency use permit for, that you contact Alan Norton at the APVMA, because there may be other states that are putting in place a permit, and it will stop duplication and mean that we can service our growers with a lot more ease. And that's where further information can be found.